The words left my mouth before my brain could stop them. The entire dining room went silent. Every champagne glass froze midair. Every hushed conversation died. And the man sitting in front of me, the man whose dark, calculating eyes had been treating me like his personal entertainment all evening, just stared at me. His name was Kai Lee. I didn't know that then. All I knew was that he was entitled, dangerous, and had turned my already impossible shift into something unbearable. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before I tell you how I grabbed a mafia boss by his $1,000 suit collar, threatened to destroy him, and somehow didn't end up dead, let me ask you something. Have you ever been pushed so far, stretched so thin, that something inside you just snaps? Not in a defeated way, but in a way that makes you realize you have absolutely nothing left to lose? That's where I was that night. That's the moment everything changed. Hey, how are you doing? Wherever you are right now, whatever you're doing, I hope you're settled in, because this story is going to take you somewhere unexpected. I'm talking about the kind of story that proves sometimes your most reckless moment becomes your greatest power move. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room becomes the key to everything you need. And sometimes, when you're at your absolute breaking point, that's exactly when life hands you a chance to rewrite the entire game. My name is Aaliyah Vance. This is the story of how I went from being a broke, exhausted waitress barely keeping my grandmother alive to becoming the woman who outsmarted one of the most ruthless men in the city. The story of how one furious, unfiltered threat turned into the leverage that changed my entire life. If you love stories about underdogs who refuse to stay down, about ordinary people who find extraordinary strength, about power, danger, and the thin line between revenge and something far more complicated, then do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling me where you're listening from. Are you home? On your commute? Trust me, you're going to want to know how I turned a mafia boss's obsession into my freedom. But let me start from the beginning. My feet were screaming. That's the first thing you need to understand. I'd been on them for 11 hours straight, running between tables at Valentino's, smiling through the kind of exhaustion that makes your bones ache. My grandmother's medication had gone up again. The hospice nurse had called that morning with the new number, and I'd done the math in my head while pouring coffee for a table of lawyers who didn't tip. I was short. Again. So when the man at table 7 started his game, I didn't have the energy for it. He'd arrived with an entourage, all expensive suits and quiet power. The kind of group that makes the manager nervous and attentive. But it was him. Dark eyes, perfect posture, a face that knew exactly how handsome it was, who made my night infinitely worse. It started small. A comment about my smile when I took his drink order. A question about whether I was always this serious when I brought the appetizers. His friends watched with barely concealed amusement, like this was entertainment they'd seen before. Tell me something, he said when I returned with their entrees, his voice smooth as the wine in his glass. Do you ever get tired of serving people who are so clearly beneath your attention? I set down his plate with practiced precision. I'm here to serve, sir, not to rate my customers. Ah, but you do rate us, don't you? He leaned back, studying me like I was a painting he was considering purchasing. I can see it in your eyes. You think we're all the same. Entitled. Predictable. He wasn't wrong, but I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. Will there be anything else? Yes, actually. He smiled, and it was the smile that did it. Not cruel, but amused. Mocking. I'd like to know what it takes to make you genuinely smile. Not this professional mask. I'm willing to invest significantly in finding out. His friends chuckled. One of them muttered something about him never giving up. Something inside me cracked. I'd smiled through my parents' funeral, through my grandmother's diagnosis, through the days when I couldn't afford to eat so she could have her medicine. I'd smiled through every entitled customer, every condescending comment, every moment of this beautiful, exhausting, soul-crushing job. But I was done smiling for him. I leaned down, close enough that only he could hear me, my hand gripping the edge of his table. Then I said it, quiet and cold and absolutely final. Flirt with me again and I'll ruin you. The table went silent. Then the tables around us. The ambient music seemed to stop, though I knew it hadn't. Everyone was staring. And he just looked at me, something shifting behind those dark eyes. Not anger. Something worse. Interest. I was fired before I even made it to the back room. The manager was apoplectic, stammering apologies to the man at table 7, while simultaneously pointing me toward the exit. I didn't fight it. I just took off my apron, grabbed my purse from my locker, and walked out into the cold night air, wondering how I was going to explain to Gran that we'd lost another income stream. I made it half a block before the car pulled up beside me. It was black, expensive, and completely silent. The back window rolled down, and there he was. The man I'd just threatened. He looked even more dangerous outside the restaurant's soft lighting. "Get in," he said. "Not a request." "Absolutely not. You just threatened to ruin me." His voice carried a hint of amusement. "Don't you want to know if I'm taking you seriously? I want to go home. Aaliyah Vance." He said my name like he'd known it all along, and my blood went cold. 26 years old. Caring for your terminally ill grandmother, Margaret Vance, in a hospice facility that costs $3,000 a month. You worked 3 jobs to cover it. And now you're down to 2. I stopped walking. He'd done his research. "Fast. Get in the car, Aaliyah. I promise you'll want to hear what I have to say." Against every survival instinct I had, I got in. The interior smelled like leather and expensive cologne. He sat across from me, completely relaxed, like he hadn't just been threatened in front of his entire table. "My name is Kai Lee," he said, "and I'm genuinely curious about something. How exactly did you plan to ruin me? Does it matter?" "It matters tremendously." He leaned forward slightly. "Because people threaten me all the time, Aaliyah. With violence, with exposure, with legal action. But you looked me in the eye and promised ruin like you'd already mapped out exactly how to do it. That's not desperation. That's strategy." I said nothing. I hadn't mapped out anything. I'd just been angry. "So here's what's going to happen," Kai continued. "You're going to come work for me. As my personal liaison. $20,000 a month, full benefits, and complete coverage of your grandmother's medical expenses." I actually laughed. "Doing what exactly?" "Whatever I need." His eyes never left mine. "You're clearly intelligent, observant, and willing to take risks when cornered. Those are valuable qualities in my world." "And what world is that?" "One where people don't usually threaten me and live to negotiate." He smiled, and it was the most dangerous thing I'd ever seen. "Consider this my response to your challenge. You wanted to ruin me? Let's see if you're actually capable of it. Take the job, Aaliyah. Get close enough to find my weaknesses. I dare you." The car stopped outside my apartment building. He'd known where I lived, too. "You have 24 hours to decide," he said as I reached for the door handle. "But we both know you've already made your choice." He was right. Damn him, he was right. The first day, I showed up in my nicest interview outfit, a 3-year-old blazer and slacks that had seen better days. Kai's assistant took one look at me and made a phone call. 20 minutes later, I was in a private boutique being fitted for clothes that cost more than my monthly rent. "Mr. Lee's executives maintain a certain standard," the stylist said, draping a silk blouse over my shoulders. The fabric felt like water against my skin. I caught my reflection in the mirror. I looked like someone else. Someone powerful. Someone dangerous. The transformation was jarring. One day I was serving appetizers in a stained uniform. The next I was walking into a glass and steel tower, wearing designer heels that made satisfying clicks against marble floors. Kai's office occupied the entire top floor, a sprawling space of minimalist luxury that screamed control and money. He looked up from his desk when I entered, and something flickered across his face. Approval, maybe. Or satisfaction at seeing his investment properly packaged. "Better," he said simply. "Sophia will show you to your office and brief you on your initial responsibilities." My office was adjacent to his, separated by a glass wall that could frost for privacy. The message was clear. He wanted me close. Wanted to watch me. Good. I wanted to watch him too. That night, alone in my new space with its designer furniture and city views, I opened my laptop and started a file. I titled it Ruin. Then I began documenting everything. Every meeting I sat in on. Every phone call I overheard. Every person who walked into Kai's office with fear in their eyes and walked out with resignation. I'd made him a promise in that restaurant. I'd looked him in the eye and told him I'd ruin him if he pushed me again. He thought it was bluster, desperation, an empty threat from a cornered woman. He was wrong. I visited Gran that weekend, sitting beside her bed in the hospice facility that now had paid in full stamped across the billing statements. She looked smaller than she had just days ago, but her mind was still sharp. "You look different," she said, touching the sleeve of my new coat. What happened, baby? I got a better job, I told her. It wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the whole truth. Is it safe? I thought about Kai Lee's dark eyes, his calculated interest, the way he'd researched my entire life in less than an hour. Probably not, I admitted. But it's necessary. She squeezed my hand. Then be smart. Be careful. And remember, sometimes the best way to survive a monster is to learn exactly where its heart is. Then you'll know where to strike if you need to. I kissed her forehead and promised I would. I was going to find Kai Lee's weakness. I was going to map every vulnerability, every secret, every crack in his perfect armor. And when I had enough, when I'd secured my freedom and Grand's future, I was going to cash in that threat. He wanted to see if I was capable of ruining him. I'd show him exactly what a desperate woman with nothing to lose could do. Turned out, I was good at this. Better than good, actually. Within 2 weeks, I'd reorganized Kai's entire scheduling system, identified 3 inefficiencies in his logistics operations, and personally negotiated a supplier contract that saved his legitimate businesses $60,000. His legitimate businesses being the import-export company, the restaurant chain, and the commercial real estate portfolio that served as very attractive fronts for the money that flowed from less legal sources. I learned fast. I had to. Kai's world operated on multiple levels. On the surface, everything was pristine: board meetings, charitable foundations, society dinners where he played the role of the successful entrepreneur. But underneath, there were other meetings. Men who came through private entrances. Conversations in Mandarin, Russian, Italian that stopped when I entered the room. Ledgers that didn't quite match the official books. He tested me constantly. A file left carelessly open on his desk. A phone call he took on speaker while I was in the room. Watching to see if I'd flinch, if I'd ask questions, if I'd run. I never did. Instead, I took notes. Mental ones, mostly, but sometimes physical ones that I kept in an encrypted file on a laptop I'd bought with cash and kept at a storage unit across town. I was building a map of Kai Lee's empire, piece by piece, meeting by meeting. The surprising part was that I was actually enjoying it. Not the criminal aspect, that still made my stomach turn. But the work itself, the strategic thinking, the high-stakes negotiations. I'd spent years being invisible, serving people who looked through me like I was furniture. Here, people listen when I spoke. Kai listened when I spoke. You're wasted on administrative work, he said one evening after I'd successfully defused a tense situation with one of his more volatile business partners. We were alone in his office, the city glittering below us. You have instincts most people spend decades developing. Maybe desperation is a good teacher, I said, not looking at him. Maybe. He moved closer, and I could feel his attention like heat against my skin. Or maybe you've always been capable of this, and you just needed someone to give you the opportunity. I finally met his eyes. Is that what you think you're doing? Giving me an opportunity? I think I'm giving you exactly what you asked for. His smile was sharp. Access. Proximity. Everything you'd need to make good on your threat. My heart kicked against my ribs. You think I'm still planning to ruin you? I think you'd be stupid not to be. He tilted his head slightly. The question is whether you'll find anything worth the risk. It was a challenge and a confession at the same time. He was daring me to look deeper, practically inviting me to find his weaknesses. It should have made me suspicious. Instead, it made me more determined. That night, I stayed late after Kai left for a dinner meeting. I accessed files I technically had clearance for, but had never explored. Financial records that went back years. Property deeds in various names. Corporate structures nested like Russian dolls. And then I found it. Not the weapon itself, but the outline of where it might be hidden. A pattern in the transactions. A name that appeared and disappeared. A thread that, if I followed it carefully enough, might lead me to exactly what I needed. The leverage that could actually ruin Kai Lee. I was so focused on the screen, I almost didn't hear the door open behind me. Find anything interesting? I turned. Kai stood in the doorway, still in his dinner jacket, watching me with those calculating dark eyes. My entire future balanced on what I said next. Look, I know some of you have been following this story from the beginning, and I just want to say, I see you. I see your comments, your likes, the fact that you keep coming back. This channel exists because of you, because you want these stories told. If this story is resonating with you, if you're invested in seeing how Aaliyah outsmarts the man who thought he could control her, then please subscribe. It's free, it takes 2 seconds, and it genuinely helps us keep bringing you these stories. We're building something here together, and your support means everything. Okay, back to the story, because what Kai did next changed everything. Yes, actually, I said, keeping my voice steady. I found a discrepancy in the quarterly projections for the restaurant division. Someone's skimming, and they're not being particularly subtle about it. It was true. I had noticed it, buried in the files I'd been reviewing. It just wasn't what I'd been focused on when he walked in. Kai moved closer, looking at my screen. He was close enough that I could smell his cologne, feel the heat of him beside me. He studied the numbers in silence. "Show me," he said finally. I walked him through it, pointing out the pattern of small, consistent withdrawals that added up to significant theft over time. His face remained impassive, but I could feel the anger radiating off him like heat from pavement. "Who has access to these accounts?" he asked quietly. "3 people. I can have names for you by morning. Tonight." I pulled up the access logs and cross-referenced them with the withdrawal patterns. It took 20 minutes of tense silence before the pattern became clear. One name appeared consistently. Marcus Chen, his restaurant division director. Someone who'd been with him for 8 years. Kai pulled out his phone and made a call. The conversation was brief in Mandarin, and his tone was colder than I'd ever heard it. When he hung up, he looked at me with something that might have been respect. "Thank you," he said. "That kind of attention to detail is rare." "What happens to him?" I asked, even though part of me didn't want to know. "He'll return what he stole. Then he'll disappear from my businesses." Kai's expression was unreadable. "I don't tolerate theft, Aaliyah. Loyalty is the only currency that matters in my world." I should have left it there. Should have nodded and gone home. But I was tired, and the adrenaline from almost being caught was making me reckless. "And what about disloyalty that hasn't happened yet?" I asked. "What about people who might be planning to betray you?" He studied me for a long moment. "Are you asking theoretically, or are you confessing something?" "I'm asking what you'd do if someone was gathering information on you, learning your vulnerabilities, mapping your weaknesses. I'd wonder why they were being so obvious about it." He moved closer, and suddenly we were standing too close, the air between us charged with something dangerous. If someone truly wanted to destroy me, they'd be more subtle. They wouldn't reorganize my business, improve my operations, save me money. They'd stay invisible until the moment they struck. "Maybe they're establishing trust first," I said. "Making themselves indispensable so you don't see the knife coming. Maybe." His voice was barely above a whisper. "Or maybe they're discovering that the person they plan to destroy is more complicated than they expected. That the monster has reasons for his cruelty. That the game they started is more dangerous than they realized." He was right, and that terrified me. Because somewhere between the designer clothes and the strategic meetings, between learning his businesses and watching him operate, I'd started to understand him. Not forgive, never forgive, but understand. And then he took me to witness what understanding cost. 2 days later, I sat in a warehouse across town and watched Kai Li systematically dismantle Marcus Chen's life. Not with violence. That would have been cleaner. Instead, with cold, precise cruelty. Phone calls that destroyed his reputation. Documents that ended his marriage. Financial manipulations that left him bankrupt. "You don't kill the betrayer," Kai explained calmly, as Marcus begged and pleaded across the warehouse floor. "You make them an example. You make them wish they'd never even thought about stealing from you." I watched it all, my stomach churning, and remembered exactly who I was dealing with. That night, back in my apartment, the new one Kai's money had paid for, I opened my encrypted files and added a new note. "He's a monster. Don't forget it. Don't let the respect, the chemistry, the way he looks at you like you're the most interesting thing in his world, make you forget what he's capable of." Because the truth was, lines were blurring. I'd catch myself laughing at his dry humor, looking forward to our evening strategy sessions, feeling a charge when our hands accidentally touched over a contract. I was running out of time. I needed to find his true weakness, secure my leverage, and get out before I became another casualty of Kai Li's world. Before whatever was building between us turned into something I couldn't walk away from. The clock was ticking, and I still had no idea where his heart was. But I was going to find it, and then I was going to decide whether to strike, or whether I'd already lost the war I'd started. The text came at 2 a.m. I didn't recognize the number, but the message made my blood turn to ice. Margaret Vance, Sunset Hospice Care, room 247. She looks peaceful when she sleeps. I was out of bed and in my car within 3 minutes, driving through empty streets with my heart hammering against my ribs. I called the hospice. The night nurse assured me Gran was fine, sleeping soundly, no visitors. But someone had been there. Someone had gotten close enough to know her room number, to watch her sleep. Someone was sending me a message. I sat in the hospice parking lot until dawn, watching her window, my phone clutched in my hand. When the sun finally rose, I went inside. Gran was awake, sipping water, completely unaware that her life had just become a bargaining chip. "You look terrible," she said when she saw me. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," I lied. "Just a long night." But everything was wrong. I'd been so careful, so strategic about gathering information on Kai without showing my hand. But someone in his world had noticed. Someone had decided the new executive, who appeared out of nowhere, was worth investigating. Worth threatening. I made it to the office by 8, running on adrenaline and terror. Kai was already at his desk, reviewing contracts. He looked up when I entered, and something in my expression made him go still. "What happened?" I showed him the text. Watched his face darken as he read it. "When did you receive this?" 2 a.m. He made a phone call, sharp and furious in Mandarin. When he hung up, his jaw was tight. "It's being handled." "Handled how?" "Someone threatened my grandmother, Kai. Someone in your world knows exactly where to hurt me." "Not someone in my world." His voice was cold. "Someone trying to hurt me by using you. There's a difference." And there it was. The truth I'd been trying to ignore. I wasn't just Kai Lee's employee anymore. I'd become visible. A target. A weakness he couldn't afford. "You need to distance yourself from me," I said quietly. "Publicly. Make it clear I'm just hired help, not important, not." "No. Kai. No." He stood, moving around his desk to face me directly. "You don't get to make yourself smaller to appease people who've already decided to use you. That's not how this works." "Then how does it work?" "Because right now my grandmother is a liability. I'm a liability. And in your world, you eliminate liabilities." Something flickered across his face. "Hurt, maybe, though that seemed impossible." "Is that what you think? That I'd eliminate you?" "I think you'd do whatever was necessary to protect your empire. You've made that abundantly clear." The silence stretched between us, heavy with everything unsaid. Finally, Kai spoke, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. "Move her. Today. I have a private facility, completely secure, off any records connected to me or you. She'll have the best care available, and no one will find her. I can't afford." "It's not a negotiation, Aaliyah. It's already arranged." He returned to his desk, his walls slamming back into place. "You have 2 hours to make the transfer. Take whoever you need from security. And Aaliyah." He looked up, his dark eyes unreadable. "After today, we accelerate your timeline. Whatever you're planning, whatever information you're gathering, finish it. Because the window for getting out safely is closing." He knew. Of course he knew. And he was giving me permission to complete what I'd started. I just had to survive long enough to use it. Moving Gran was like trying to relocate a ghost. Everything had to be untraceable, every document scrubbed, every connection severed. Kai's security team handled it with military precision, transferring her to a facility that didn't officially exist, buried in corporate paperwork 3 layers deep. "Where are we going, baby?" Gran asked as they loaded her into the private ambulance. "Somewhere safer," I told her, holding her hand. "Somewhere better." She studied my face with those sharp eyes that age hadn't dimmed. "You're in trouble." "I'm getting us out of trouble," I corrected. "Trust me." The new facility was beautiful, more like a luxury hotel than a hospice. Her room had windows overlooking a private garden, and the medical equipment was state-of-the-art. But what mattered most was the security. Guards who looked like they'd served in special forces. Cameras. Protocols. No one was getting to her here. With Gran secured, I had exactly one priority left: finishing what I'd started. I'd been mapping Kai's empire for weeks, documenting everything from shell corporations to offshore accounts. But I'd been missing the critical piece, the one thing that could actually ruin him, the thing he dared me to find. It came from an unexpected source. Kai's attorney, James Park, visited the office late one Thursday night. I was working in my office when I heard raised voices through the frosted glass. An argument about exposure and unacceptable risk. I pulled up the audio feed. one of the many surveillance tools I'd quietly installed, and listened. The Hong Kong accounts are flagged, Park was saying. If the investigation connects them to the senator's campaign contributions, it's not just RICO charges. It's treason adjacent. You'll lose everything. Then make sure they don't connect them, Kai replied coldly. I can't make miracles, Kai. The paper trail exists. Unless you want me to destroy evidence, which I won't do. Then what do you suggest? Dissolve the accounts. Take the loss. Move the assets somewhere cleaner. The conversation continued, but I'd heard enough. Senator's campaign. Hong Kong accounts. RICO implications. This wasn't just organized crime. This was political corruption at the highest levels. This was exactly what I needed. I spent the next 72 hours barely sleeping, tracing the threads Park had mentioned. The accounts were sophisticated, buried under legitimate business transactions, but the pattern was there. Kai had been funneling money to Senator Richard Morrison's campaigns for 6 years. In exchange, Morrison had killed regulations, blocked investigations, and provided advance warning of federal operations. It was brilliant. It was absolutely illegal. And if it went public, it would destroy both of them. I compiled everything into a single encrypted file. Bank records, email correspondence, meeting logs, a complete map of the corruption pipeline. Then I made 3 copies on 3 different secure drives, hiding them in 3 different locations. I was so focused on the work that I almost missed Kai standing in my office doorway. It's midnight, he said quietly. You've been here for 14 hours. Just finishing something. The thing that's going to ruin me? I looked up, meeting his eyes. Do you really want to know? I want to know if you found what you were looking for. The honest answer was yes. The smart answer was silence. I chose the truth. I found it. He nodded slowly, something unreadable crossing his face. Good. Then we both know where we stand. He turned to leave, then paused. Aaliyah, whatever happens next, it's been extraordinary watching you work. Then he was gone, and I was alone with the weapon that would either free me or get me killed. I scheduled the meeting for a Friday afternoon in Kai's office, with no one else present. He accepted without question, which should have made me nervous. Instead, it made me certain. He'd been waiting for this. When I walked in, he was standing by the window, looking out at the city he'd conquered through strategy and ruthlessness. He didn't turn around when I entered. I assume this isn't about the quarterly projections, he said. No. I set my tablet on his desk. It's about keeping a promise. That made him turn. His expression was calm, almost curious. The ruin you threatened me with. Yes. Show me. I pulled up the file. Showed him the Hong Kong accounts, the senator's name, the money trail that connected them. Watched his face remain perfectly composed as I laid out exactly how this information, if released to the right journalist or federal prosecutor, would dismantle his empire and put him in prison for the rest of his life. When I finished, the silence was absolute. Thorough, he said finally. Impressive, actually. You found something even my enemies haven't discovered. I had advantages they didn't. You had trust. He moved closer, and I forced myself not to step back. I gave you access because I wanted to see what you'd do with it, whether you were truly capable of the threat you made. And now you know. Now I know. He tilted his head slightly. So what happens next, Aaliyah? You hand this to the FBI? Sell it to my competitors? Destroy me publicly like you promised? None of that. I straightened my spine, channeling every ounce of strength I had left. I want a deal. His eyebrow raised. A deal. You let me walk away. Completely, cleanly, permanently. You provide $5 million in liquid assets, transferred to an account I control. You guarantee, in writing, with legal protections I specify, that neither you nor anyone in your organization will ever contact me, threaten me, or come near my grandmother again. You give me my freedom, Kai. Total and irrevocable. And in exchange, the evidence stays buried. All copies destroyed. Your secret dies with our arrangement. He studied me for a long moment, and I couldn't read his expression. Then, shockingly, he smiled. Not the dangerous smile I'd seen before. Something genuine. You're not asking for more money. Not asking for power, or a position, or ongoing payments. Just freedom. It's all I ever wanted. Most people in your position would demand everything. Bleed me for years. I'm not most people. No. His voice was soft. You're really not. He walked to his desk, pulled out a leather portfolio, and began writing. I watched, barely breathing, as he drafted the agreement in his own hand. $5 million. Complete severance. Legal protections. A non-contact guarantee that extended to my grandmother's natural life and beyond. When he finished, he signed it. Then he looked up. I'll have my attorney draw up the formal documents by Monday. The money will transfer Tuesday. You'll be free by Wednesday. I stared at him. Just like that. Just like that. He stood, extending his hand. You earned it, Aaliyah. You walked into my world with nothing but rage and desperation, and you outplayed me completely. That deserves respect. I shook his hand, and the contact sent electricity up my arm. For a moment, we just stood there, connected by this final, strange moment of understanding. For what it's worth, he said quietly. In another life, I think we could have built something extraordinary together. In another life, I agreed. You wouldn't be a criminal, and I wouldn't have needed to threaten you to survive. Fair point. I walked to the door, then turned back. Kai, thank you for keeping your word. Thank you, he replied, for reminding me why I respect dangerous women. And just like that, it was over. 6 months later, I stood on a beach I'd only ever dreamed about, watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. The transition out of Kai's world had been smoother than I'd dared hope. The money transferred exactly as promised. The legal documents were airtight, reviewed by 3 different attorneys I'd hired independently. Kai kept his word completely. No contact, no threats, no midnight texts about Gran's room number. We were free. Gran's new facility, one I'd chosen and paid for myself, was 20 minutes from my new home. A real home, not an apartment I could barely afford, but a house with a garden where she could sit when she felt strong enough. She was declining, we both knew that, but she was declining in comfort, with dignity, surrounded by beauty. You did good, baby, she told me last week, holding my hand in her garden. You walked into the darkness and came back to the light. I'd used a portion of the money to start what I'd always dreamed of, a consulting firm helping small businesses optimize their operations. Turned out, the skills I'd developed in Kai's world translated beautifully to legitimate business. My client list was growing. My reputation was building. I was Aaliyah Vance, business consultant. Not Aaliyah Vance, the poor waitress who'd threatened a Mafia boss. Though sometimes, late at night, I still thought about him, about the strange, intense connection we'd built in those few months, about the way he'd looked at me in that final meeting. Not with anger, but with something that looked almost like pride. I wondered if he ever thought about me, the woman who'd kept her promise, the woman who'd found his weakness and chosen freedom over destruction. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. My heart stopped, thinking impossible thoughts, but it was just a former colleague from the restaurant, asking if I wanted to grab coffee and catch up. I smiled and replied yes, because that was my life now. Coffee dates and client meetings and beach sunsets with Gran when she was strong enough. Normal things. Safe things. Beautiful, ordinary things I'd fought a war to achieve. The sun dipped below the horizon, and I took a deep breath of salt air. I'd walked into darkness and bet everything on one furious threat. And I'd won. Not because I'd destroyed the monster, but because I'd learned exactly where his heart was. And he'd learned exactly where mine was. And somehow, impossibly, we'd both chosen to let each other go. That was the real victory. Not the money, not the freedom, though both mattered desperately. The victory was knowing I'd played the most dangerous game of my life and walked away on my own terms. I was finally, completely, beautifully free. You made it to the end. That means something, you know? In a world where everyone's scrolling past everything, you stayed. You invested in Aaliyah's journey. And that tells me you're the kind of person who values real storytelling. This channel only grows when people like you decide we're worth supporting. If this story moved you, if you found yourself rooting for Aaliyah, if you believe stories about people fighting impossible odds deserve to be told, then please subscribe. It takes 2 seconds, costs you nothing, and it means everything to our ability to keep creating. We're building a community here of people who believe in underdogs and second chances and the power of one brave decision. Be part of that. Hit subscribe. We'll be here, telling the next story, hoping you'll come back.